Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Wealth and Wellness Report podcast. I'm your host, Diego. Today, we've got an amazing guest. Her name's Mel Palmer, Due Diligence and Wellness. Mel, how are you?
Hey, good, Diego. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for taking the time and being here and making the trip from Monterey. That's like really, really dope. I'm super excited to talk to you about wealth and wellness and your business and due diligence in particular. I'd love to, get like a little bit of a genesis story though first, so that the audience can learn a bit about who you are and where you come from. Yeah.
So I'm originally from Wisconsin, from a massive farm family, and I joined the Air Force in 2007. So, without making it sound like I'll tell you my entire life story, I'll tell you that is relevant because I used my VA loans right away, to buy property. And so I got into real estate in 2009, and my face would say otherwise, but those VA loans are an incredible benefit available to military members. And so right after the crash, getting into real estate, there was a lot of yapping about how risky real estate is and how you'll lose all your money. And so the Dave Ramsey mindset kind of kicked in. And I knew that it was cheaper for me to have a mortgage than it was for me to pay rent. And I still snagged a house, even though I felt like it was a really risky endeavor just because of all the noise around real estate at the time. And a lot of people did lose a lot of money. So fast forward, throughout my military career, I continued to invest in real estate, and I house hacked before I knew what house hacking was. I bought property in Hawaii, and I fixed up part of it for me to live in, rented out the rest, sold that, moved it into short-term rental. I've still got that in Big Bear. Bought a triplex. I've got a dirt lot I'm developing. And so I did this like kind of genesis of evolution, dabbling in real estate and doing a lot of stuff myself, and losing money to contractors and developers and getting it back. And in my military time, I was a federal agent. So I did federal investigations, criminal investigations, and I had this combination of an investor's mindset and investigator's mindset. And in 2019, I got out of the Air Force and I was like, I'm going to go full into real estate. And so that's kind of like where this real estate journey took me. And in 2022, I realized I had a lot of cash because I had done pretty well with my investments. And I started private lending because the talk of the town at the moment was, if you have cash, and you don't have time, you should leverage your cash as a private lender to people who are doing more deals than you. And I was like, yeah, I'm happy to do that. Did it, and totally got stuck in a Ponzi scheme, like, oh no, straight up fraudulent, misrepresented situation, and lost a lot of money. And so I realized there was this massive gap of, exit strategies available and due diligence, and then I would say the like suspension of knowledge that happens when you're new and you think you can apply skills from one area to another. And so I was a good buy and hold investor, but you do the underwriting for a deal as a lender, and that's completely different. And so I was kind of how I got into the due diligence sector of this whole thing with this long journey of real estate. Yeah,
that's super interesting. So the due diligence piece came like as like a method of necessity where you had to do work in order to like vet the next set of investors, because it sounded like you weren't completely done quite yet. Like that experience wasn't like, I'm putting the white flag up and I'm completely done with real estate. You're still active.
Yeah, still active. And I mean, you met me, we met each other while I was doing transaction coordination, right? And I was doing transaction management. I was doing deal structuring, underwriting, and I saw so many transactions that had no business getting to the closing table, period. And people would still go through with them because they were so fixated on this door number.
The romance of it.
The romance of getting my first deal, my first door, or my 50th, right? When so many of them were bad deals. And so I realized I was really good at getting people to closing, like you can close this if you want and I'll help you with it. But also maybe we shouldn't even be buying this property if you're not doing it with values, if you're not doing it with purpose and intention, and if you're not doing it, knowing what the heck you're doing and having that due diligence, right?
Yeah. So we met through the Sub 2 community, and we were looking for a transaction coordinator to close on our first property. It was a subject to deal, and we didn't know really what we were doing, other than broad strokes. This is kind of how you do it. So when we met with you and kind of interviewed you through the process, and like, how can you help support and coordinate this transaction for us? It was really clear from the get-go, like you weren't just a transaction coordinator. You were also an investor. You were doing more on the front end than most transaction coordinators would do. So that experience to me, like I felt like, well, I felt compelled to want to work with you more because of that level of professionalism, integrity, and attention to detail. Because you did say a lot of things along the way, like, hey, this came up. Are you sure you want to do this? Or what about that? Like, you might want to reconsider, or do you, I mean, it was really a white glove experience. So I like really appreciate like you helping out with that deal. And it kind of set the stage. So post that transaction, which we still have in our portfolio, by the way, and it's doing really well.
Cool.
You were like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I was so bummed out because I've had so many people in my career that I've worked with that I worked with either for a really long time or had a really good experience with, that were just either retiring, they were getting out of the business or whatever. And it's always like this scramble, like, oh my gosh, who am I going to fill the gap with? And you're like, don't worry, I got somebody. Her name's Daniela. And I was like, okay, cool. And then we met Daniela, and it was like you two were two peas in a pod. So it ended up working really well with Daniela, until she was like, I'm actually not doing this anymore either. And we were like, okay, crap. So now we need another transaction coordinator for our single family portfolio. So if you happen to know anybody, we're interviewing. But the due diligence really resonated with me, Mel, because, you know, I try my best to apply as much due diligence on every project I do, whether it's construction or real estate, or even like my own personal regiment, like my personal development. You know, I want to grow as a human being. I want to get better every day. Like, what sort of due diligence packaging do I need to architect in order for me to be successful? You run a due diligence kind of consulting firm. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I have both training and done for you services, done with you services. And so I've got, you'll hear often people will say, invest in the deal, right? Because that's where the cash flow is going to come from. And you'll hear somebody else say, invest with know, like, and trust, right? Mm-hmm. And I felt like there's like these two camps and there was no convergence. And the reality is the deal matters. The person also matters because deals don't default. People do, right? And a deal can go sideways, and a good jockey is going to drag that horse across the finish line and make sure to take care of you, right? Yeah. And the shitty one's just going to shoot the horse, right? And so the person does matter, but of course the deal matters as well. So it was, you know, don't invest in the deal, don't invest in the person, invest in the information. So it's the deal, the person, and the information is kind of the thesis of my due diligence services. And so I've got this investor passport where it's kind of the person-based, leading with credibility and verification of credibility, because anybody can put their pitch deck in a slideshow or a Canva doc, but that doesn't make it true. True. Right. And so it's a third-party verified resume of sorts. And so that's Capital Verified's like main product service. And I say it's a product service because we go over mission, vision, values. We also deal with goals and kind of what your market is or your buy box. And then the verification of background, education, experience, assets, income, and credit. And so the things that we do want to make sure, hey, you don't have a whole list of bankruptcies in your past, or you can't pay Visa, right? A lot of investors will also say that credit doesn't matter. Well, it does if there's a pattern of behavior below the surface, right? It doesn't if it's a contractor that's constantly racking up all of their credit card bills so that they can fund their flips, right? As long as they're paying, sure, we don't care about it, but we do care about credit reporting history, right? And so people want to throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to like what does and doesn't matter in investing. And it's like, no, they all matter.
Yeah. And do you see yourself working more with like first-time investors or intermediate or more advanced?
So it totally varies.
Okay.
I say first-time investors probably need me more, but they haven't learned the hard lesson yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of the people who are plenty experienced, but realize, hey, there's a lot to be lost here. And I've lost in one way or 10 others as I've grown in this journey, right, in this industry. And so they know the value of due diligence. And so I wish more new investors would come and use my services because they could save a lot of time and money. But the reality is I have the more experienced ones that have kind of taken some battle wounds.
Yeah. It's really interesting because it sounds like it's like almost like an incubation of a first-time real estate investor where they can not only get, some services, but they can also get you to coach them along the way, teach them the ropes, perhaps look at some blind spots that they maybe didn't consider at all because of the lack of experience.
Exactly.
That due diligence expertise is something that we need throughout the entire industry. Your business, are you working with a team? Do you have goals moving into the future? What's the outlook for Capital Verified?
Yeah. So I've gone through seasons of, I had a couple other team members. One did kind of like breakthrough coaching, one did Clifton Strengths, and then I had another like business consulting individual that would help build all the back end systems. So we'd work on, mission, vision, values, their markets, their buy box, their lend criteria, and then we'd go through all these other steps, right? And that was my Informed Investor program. It's on hold at the moment. And then I do have some other private lenders that we've got a collective for private lenders. So, by private lenders for private lenders, where we offer a space where you're learning from people who are actually doing what you want to do, not your borrowers. Right. So how many people do you hear, reach out to me to learn how to get double-digit returns backed by real estate?
Oh my gosh.
They're just looking to borrow your money.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're not actually teaching you how to do anything. They want your money.
And they're everywhere on Facebook,
They're everywhere.
They're just, I was kicked in the shorts starting out in the sub-T community with a private money loan.
Right.
And, I had this already kind of weird voice in my head saying like, do some due diligence, like put a lien on something, like prioritize the capitalization of the deal, but then also like the security behind it. So I was able to at least put some security through this private money loan. But, fortunately, like this year, I'm finally seeing my money back after 3 years, 2.5 years.
Yeah. And a lot of work, right? And you get into it to be
and
passive.
Money.
Yes.
Yeah.
You get into it to be passive and you turn out having this active litigation. It's like, there's nothing passive about that.
And everybody seems to know what they're doing until, attorneys are involved and a lot of money is involved. And then it's like, oh, well, I'm not inclined to really help you out that much now. And I've had a lot of people just say that they're willing to help and then they simply ghost or disappear.
Totally.
Which is really the antithesis to how I operate. Because ultimately, I want to bring value into the world and I want to help as many individuals, families, homesteads, landscapes, as possible. It's the permaculture ethics, people care, earth care, and the return of the surplus. And I think that's where you and I connected a lot too, because you're also in the wellness space. I would love how you kind of weave in this wellness into your businesses and, how you promote that as well.
Yeah. So, I'll say my military background, I've been to Kandahar, Afghanistan. I've done a lot of live 24/7 missions where we put warheads on foreheads. And then when I switched to becoming an investigator, I dealt with a lot of really heavy stuff with, sexual abuse and child abuse. And all of that was very difficult, but I was shocked and awed by the earthquake that I felt when I got ripped off. And so I felt like,
know that feeling.
Yeah. And so it was $180,000 of my money. It was $50,000 of my friend's money, who just wanted to get on the bandwagon and thought it sounded like a great deal. And she saw me put my money where my mouth was, so she was ready for it too. And so I took on that debt because I felt horrible. And so $230,000 plus attorney's fees, right? And as you know, $10,000 retainer, poof, right?
Gone.
And, just the time, money, and energy that was wasted, not to mention the absolute kick in the pants I felt, right?
Yeah.
And so I was already doing work in the post-traumatic growth sector for first responders. And so I was I already received this training. I was facilitating this training, and
that was for military
and law enforcement.
Got you.
So some fire, some cops, and then military members.
For the longest time, I always thought you were like a fighter pilot in the Air Force. Like, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just the way you operated. Like, I was just like, she's a fighter pilot, you guys. Like, she's. So obviously not.
Yeah. No. So first intelligence, and then I was a special agent.
Got you.
And yeah, so it's funny because I knew all the things. I knew how to. I knew my wellness practices. I knew that I can get through difficult things because I've gone through way worse, in my head. But it's funny how we don't get to pick what's worse. Like. Your body will, will tell you. Your gut. And so, I realized, hey, there's this, first of all, I was trying to skip to the good part. And I always tell people, it's one of those things like you tell people you can't skip past grief. You tell people you can't skip past the lows that happen when bad things happen. Right. And then I experienced it in a way that was raw and real and current and not future me looking back on past me, or present me rather, looking on my past experiences and saying like, oh yeah, that was really hard, but I got through it. But when you're in it is when you try to skip. Right. And so there was this moment where I realized that values in the woo-woo is so much more important as the foundation of your investing, because if all you're doing is investing in returns, if all you're doing is investing in doors and metrics, one, you're never going to actually experience happiness. You'll get fleeting joys, right? And the way you got there might stick with you. And if the way you got there isn't with purpose, isn't with values or impact, that will stick with you more, right? And also, when you're investing just in the returns and failing to do it with your values, you're going to miss the stuff that's going to hem you up, right? So I would have never gotten into those deals had I been investing in my values. And while as an investigator, as a due diligence expert and consultant, I absolutely will say there are ways you can avoid this. But if we just start with your values, you won't even have to use my tactics and tricks and background checks. Right?
Totally. Intention is everything. And I think if you don't have a why in this business, it'll be like a drug. Every time you get a deal, you'll get high. And every time you get kicked in the shorts, there'll be a low. So you'll be on this roller coaster of up and down, up and down. And in my opinion, legacy isn't built that way. It's like a turtle. You're slowly building over the course of your lifetime, and then passing that baton along to the next generations. And to me, it's 7 generations deep. I think there is a huge need in the industry to provide not only these services, but to this education. And I think a big reason why we started doing this is like, what's the why? What's the intention? Why are you doing this? Because if it's just like what you said, the metrics and like the math and making some cash flow on a rental property, then that there's more to life than just, cranking out single family doors. in my opinion. What else are you working on that, that you're really jazzed about right now in that space?
Yeah. So I'm hosting workshops, and like right now it's a 1-day retreat, but it'll be 2 days in the future. June 22nd is the first one. Depending on when this comes out, it may or may not have already happened. And
probably, yeah,
sure, yeah. So October is the following. So I'll do them quarterly. Oh, cool. But so we always hear mind, body, spirit, right? But I have a problem without including finance, because so I believe it's mind, body, finance, and spirit's your fire in the center, right? And I didn't come up with this. This is part of that post-traumatic growth training that I used to facilitate. And I really love it. And in the investment space, I think it's even more important, because we're recognizing that finance is part of it. If you have mind, body, spirit, perfect, great, but you have no money, like, is that perfect? Like, are you sure you can live meagerly, live off the land, be a total nomad or something? But like, if we're recognizing our current economy, capitalism, if we're, able to acknowledge that we live in the real world, not in Plato's Republic, like, then finance is part of that wellness triangle. And you can't tell me that when your finances are screwed, that your mind's not also screwed, right? That your spirit isn't also crushed. And so you just can't tell me that's not part of the equation. So anyway, these workshops that I'm doing is mind, body, finance, spirit is the framework of it. And we're going through the post-traumatic growth process. We're going through the fact that we're capable of reframing and reflecting on our experiences and transforming them, right? Because we always hear about PTSD. Nobody talks about PTG. And that's the exact flip side of the coin, that because of your bad experiences, because of trauma, because of whatever, you get to experience the growth, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. So, finance being a humongous tool to utilize in those levels of the self. Because without money money is a tool, and without money, then you don't have the ability to do work, because money ultimately is representation to do work.
Right.
And energy is work. So I love that you're doing that. And, for us here, we're constantly working with homeowners, investors, and everybody that's, hoping to do what you're doing, is create a livelihood and a way of life that resonates, that feels grounded, that is purposeful.
Right.
And that is I think why we're here on planet Earth, is to learn through life's experience. But to have like a catalyst or a conduit of real estate or construction, personal development, fitness, that is like going to get you there, I think, a little bit faster, just because of how competitive and how, intense these industries are. And to change the narrative a little bit as well, to say, well, it doesn't have to be this way, A to B. It could be more circular. It could be more integrated. The wellness components of your business and these workshops that you're doing, do you see a lot of women involved in these sessions, or is it mostly men?
So it's a good mix for this first one. And I say first one. So I actually did one in Albuquerque in April. They flew me out there, put me up, and I did a 4-hour workshop with them. And it was the Auntie Tilly Foundation. So they are an organization that started in the loss of an aunt who was an entrepreneurial spirit, who took care of everybody, didn't have kids of her own, but was always willing to help and share knowledge and, invested in creative businesses and whatnot. And so, even though it's for women of New Mexico, and their kids, it was a good mixture of men and women there. And then, this first workshop, I want to say, is a good mix too. Maybe it's like 60-40. I think just by nature of being a woman in this industry,
60 women, 40 men.
Probably. Okay. Yeah. I didn't like, and it's a small one. I like 8 to 16 max. 8 to 12 is like ideal. So anyway, this first one, I think I've got 12 people. And again, I say first in Monterey, first of its kind, first of this quarter or something. But
Cool.
so yeah, I think just by nature of being a woman in the industry, sometimes I attract more women.
Yeah.
But like at the end of the day, this is a human condition. This is a human need, and you know, everybody can benefit from this. And that's also, you know, the reason why I took what was for first responders is this is like first responders don't have a monopoly on suffering. Like, in fact, they're responding to other people's suffering more often than not. So the only difference is they have their own suffering on top of the public suffering. And
it's a lot of weight to carry.
Yeah. And so, you know, at the end of the day, everybody goes through difficult things and everybody can experience this post-traumatic growth. And I experienced the lowest and the most growth in some of these experiences just in the investment world.
Common fears and roadblocks that you see in the space, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah. So in my training, I talk a lot about cognitive distortions and limiting beliefs. So I think so many of the limiting beliefs that women have specifically are this, I am alone, right? And I guess I should back that up, because we could reframe that and say men have that same thing where you think, I'm the one who makes the money. I'm the one the whole family like relies on. It's all on me. I'm alone, right? And so there's this massive limiting belief that people have when they're not taking into account what the massive lift around them is when they're hyperfixating on one thing, right? Like maybe work, because you think that money is the only thing that matters. So you work really long days, but that means somebody else is picking everybody up from school and dropping them off. That means somebody else is going to the PTA meetings. They're taking care of the emotional difficulty that happens. It's like you forget there's another side of that coin always. And there's other people, whether they're teachers in your past, your parents now, caretakers, like teachers for your children, or your spouse, right? And so first of all, you're not alone. Everybody thinks that. I had to work through that one myself, still am, if I'm being honest. And yeah, so that's one of the biggest ones that I see. So everything's on me. And then I'll talk about like when I lost money, right? There's this cycle that we go through of, you know, we're negativity bias, right? 80% of our thoughts are negative, and we recycle those thoughts at a 95% rate. And that's a National Science Foundation number. Most numbers are made up. That one's real. but yeah, so this negativity bias is like bad things happen. Okay, boom. You start thinking about, it's personal, or it's pervasive, it's permanent. So it's personal. Like, I got ripped off. They took money from me, right? The reality is they ripped off like 12 other people that I know of, right? And then also expand beyond that. Ponzi scheme's a, you know, antique fraud scheme.
It's been around a while.
It's a little vintage.
Yeah.
So it's not the first time, it's not the last time. And there's, you know, probably 10 other ones going on just in this community. Yeah. And so it's not personal. In fact, it's external. It's not pervasive, right? Right away, it's like, oh, the entire real estate industry is fraud, full of fraud. It's like, well, yeah. And it's the same industry where I made a lot of fucking money in. So, I mean, there's both sides of that coin. And then the permanent thing is like, I'll never recover from this. Like, but like I made that money before, I can make it again. And also I have more than enough, right? So it's just reframing these things, because we have so many limiting beliefs and cognitive distortions that just kind of can keep you stuck. So
that's really interesting. Do you have any success stories of someone that you've worked with in your community, or a client that like really, really moved you? You know, because it sounds like you come across a lot of people that have had this trauma, and then those who've like done the work and have completely flipped around and then become extremely successful from the inside out.
I'd love to say I do, but I will say it's a very personal journey, right? And so it's kind of like a mirror. If you hear my story and you're like, that didn't happen to me, but I can think of 3 other ways that I experienced those feelings, right? And so I think, you know, at its core, we all have the same feelings. We have different experiences that will like rock us and send us to the negative, and make us feel like everything's messed up, right? And so I've definitely heard a ton of stories. And I always like to say, like, they're not necessarily my short stories to share, right? But off the top of my head, I don't necessarily have one, but it's deeply personal.
Yeah, I've always been a huge fan of the underdog, and a huge fan of the individual or the family or the entity that went through a hard time and then turns it around and has not only kind of healed themselves, but then that healing also externalized to other individuals or other families. And it's this really beautiful way to like lift up humanity. And that is constantly, a craft. You have to like continue to sharpen your pencil and work at it, and shit's going to happen all the time in life, and you have to take it in stride and never quit. But when you apply this to business, it's easier said than done, because you're like, yourself, your family, your livelihood is a little different than like your bank account and what's external. Like if you have a mark on your skin, you're going to go to the doctor and you're going to check it out and see if you're going to have to get that removed. But if like you have a rental property and it's not producing the $300 that you wish you had, you probably won't be running to the bank or running to somebody to say, hey, can I get that $200 or $300 extra? I find it really interesting where people, when it hits like closer to home, they are more willing to take action.
Yeah.
But if it's, more external, like an investment property or something that's out of state, that's not like in front of your face, you're not really that inclined to take so much action. How do you change people's mindset to like encompass all of it into a holistic approach rather than just this or that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm of the belief that I can't change anybody's mindset, right? And it's kind of like, hey, if something resonates, I had I just finished my yoga certification.
Yeah.
Which is funny. I had a yoga instructor that said like resonance is reality. And I really liked that, because what I say might not resonate with somebody, but when somebody else says it, once it resonates, it's like, well, that's exactly what I said. How often does that happen with your kids, right? You're like, I've been telling you that this whole time. And one teacher or one coach tells you. And
they're
now
like, it clicks.
Yeah. So I think like sometimes you just need to, sorry, a little hugger. Yeah, that's my kid. We're, dink with a dog. So I think people need to be ready to change. They need to want to change, because nobody can force you to change. I think sometimes people struggle because they refuse to change. Mm-hmm. So something can happen and they're so dead set on trying to get back to normal, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, there is no back to normal. There's a new normal, mm-hmm. right? And you can kind of fester in this new normal, or you can use that as kind of your launch pad for growth, mm-hmm. right? And so the festering in the new normal is where you're still hyper fixated on the old, right? What it used to be before my injury, before my loss, before my, name your trauma or critical incident that affected you, right? But also there's the empathy, there's the new relationships, the new possibilities, like the deep and meaningful change, all of the things that can happen because of the experience. And so we struggle when we refuse to change, mm-hmm. I think, and when we're stuck on what things should be, could be, would be, mm-hmm. had not something happened, or had this thing that could have happened gone the way I wanted it to. And so the idea behind this is like, struggle's a choice, but growth is also a choice.
Absolutely.
Right. And so, you asked a question earlier about examples of some of this change. And I guess I'll say, like, a lot of the post-traumatic growth research is based on 3 populations. One being bereaved parents who have lost children. One being adults who lost limbs like late in life. And then the third being POWs from Vietnam. And so like one example that's a little anecdotal, and I don't have specific names, but it's parents who lost their child. Their child played baseball, and they were able to found an entire organization, a nonprofit that allowed kids in this area that otherwise would not have access to a field, would not have access to, teams that they could play on, were able to found this organization to help a lot of growth for underprivileged kids. And, they would have never chosen to lose their child, right? But they acknowledged that they lived a way more purposeful and meaningful life with all of the people that they were able to help because of that experience.
Yeah. So my son is 16 years old, and, we've been really lucky and really blessed. I've got a really good friend who has a 3-year-old, who's battling with neuroblastoma. And it's been, believe it or not, inspiring to see how they've taken on the challenge and the trauma. They worked with us on regenerating and healing their landscape and their homestead, changing even energy frequencies inside the home and outside of the home. And we used a really portfolio approach to the planning process, and a lot of talks, a lot of discussions on, amenities, location of those amenities, feelings. It was such an introspective experience, that to have that kind of trauma, knock on wood, just super blessed, to be able to help people, in any way that I can through these networks and these, teams that I've built, in the passive. So private equity comes to mind, through all of this discussion, because you're wanting to create a way of life, or you're trying to increase a legacy, or you want to, fill up your pocketbook and have that kind of center fire grow. I'd love for you to help define for the listeners what exactly is private equity, and what does it mean to have passive income? Because that we can unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess when it comes to private equity, I won't, claim to know whatever the perfect definition is, but I will also say, I think it depends on who you talk to, right? Mm-hmm. So if I were to talk about private lending specifically, there's often, it's your cash, it's your credit, it's your leverage that you are personally loaning out. But there's so many people that also raise funds and start a fund, and then we'll take friends and family, or we'll have syndication. Yeah. Or in a syndication might be for their own investment, right? Or they're leveraging it and investing in someone else's project. But so that all can depend. And then, you go to the American Association of Private Lenders conference, and none of them are private lenders. They all have a fund. They are not lending their own money. They all have lines of credit from the massive institutions, right? And so you're like, oh, okay. But it's not the bank, right? Somebody else is the gatekeeper, not the bank. And so I think a lot of people consider private equity anything but the bank, even if sometimes they're actually leveraging the bank in that process. You might have a HELOC, you might have a line of credit, you might have, something that Bitcoin is the bank underneath. Yeah, underneath everything. The bank might still be there, but the gatekeeper is different. So I feel like the gatekeeper is private versus the bank.
That makes sense.
And that's just Mel's, take on private equity. Your question about passive income. Oh, that one's fun. That one's a fun one to unpack, because I feel like it's a very manipulative marketing tactic more often than not, because for anything to be passive, there's an active component in the planning. And, back to the way you design regenerative ecosystems. Like maybe at year 7, it's quote unquote passive, but you still can get a pest. You still can get drought. You still can have these things happen. Now, yes, the ecosystem makes that foundation a lot stronger, but it took 7 years to build that ecosystem.
True.
So I think things have the potential to be passive in seasons. And that's only with active preparation on the front end.
Yeah. The best fertilizer is a gardener's shadow. And management and stewardship and care is needed all the time. You can never just say, oh, cool, it's done, and then walk away. Life doesn't work that way. I think we've had this, and this goes, I think, way back through humanity, like this misconception things just being self-sufficient and taking care of themselves, and they don't. I think there's an anthropogenic component to that system that is required for it to be better. And it happens in the landscape, like you had mentioned, and it also happens within private equity or investments. What are some common mistakes that you see people make when they jump into these deals?
I mean, I'll always start with like investing in the returns instead of the information, right? And then below that,
the bottom number.
Yeah.
I can get $100,000 on this $100,000.
Right. And so the returns, people just chase returns. They chase quick money. They chase passive, right? I think that's the biggest one. And then below that, if the information also isn't being fed by your values, right? I feel like that's an underlying cancer in this process, right? It's failing to articulate those values and live by them, because we can all say family matters, but if you're working 12-hour days and not actually able to give your kids anything but your leftover crumbs of energy, and maybe that's snapping at them, like, tell me family is really a value, right? And so I think that's the biggest one, right? Investing in the returns, not the information. And then, and I say this not to judge. I say this because if you say it, maybe it's a moment for a mirror, and I've said it before. And so that's why I really am, trying to preface it with it's not to judge. But if your motto is I invest anywhere the numbers work, right? You're just telling me that you're chasing returns. You're telling me that you have no underlying values that are guiding your decisions, because anywhere the numbers work does not align with whatever values you claim to live by.
Yeah. And then working with those individuals that share the same values, building those teams is, to me, way more important than the bottom number, because you can do way more work collectively as a team than you can individually. How much capital does someone really need to get started confidently? And, would you suggest them working by themselves or with a team or a mentor? I think mentorship comes up quite a bit when we're talking about due diligence and private equity.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, I mean, even mentorships require due diligence, because people will chase after a mentor. Right. And at the end of the day, if that person's not doing what you want to do, if they're not living a life the way you want to live your life, how good of a fit is that? You're trying to, use a hammer for the job of a drill, right? And so just understanding what you're actually trying to achieve and trying to pick mentors based off of that, I think, is like even a due diligence step. At the end of the day, I feel like people need filters for their decision making, and they can't just chase and expect other people to hold their hand and do everything for them, because I just don't believe in blueprints. I really don't. I don't think there's a blueprint for anyone or anything, because everyone's coming to it with different skills, different values, different goals, right? Different traumas that are kind of like fueling what some of these goals are like. Right. So
yeah. And you don't know what they are until, the very end, a lot of the times, where it's like, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do I think you should go it alone? No, absolutely not. But also, I think you really need to focus on yourself first and kind of unpacking your own stuff. And I think doing that with others, is great. I could plug a workshop that happens quarterly where you can dig into yourself. But, I think that's saves a lot of time, energy, and maybe some misaligned investments. If you work on, there's a million books out there. There's a lot of podcasts. The fact that you're kind of melding these really important topics is incredible. I'm sure they could binge your podcast to try to start unpacking what that is, what matters. And other voices are certainly helpful because they can be mirrors for ourselves. But if you're listening to other voices to be the other voice, that's a problem.
Yeah. So you've developed a knack for this, and you've become really, really good at what you do. I've always wondered where did all this come from? I'm interested to know, childhood, college, or the military. Who wakes up and says I want to be an agent?
Yeah, what's so funny is a lot of things have happened by accident, right? I actually specifically remember somebody was recently talking about manifesting, right? And you can do your human design analysis and figure out what kind of manifestor you are. And I had, I'll listen to it. Everything's information, right? Like some of it you can discard, but I'll say I talked to this human design coach. And she was like the third person who said this to me, because apparently whatever my woo-woo chart says, it's like, oh, you're a specific manifestor. I'm like, I don't know what that means, but I'll tell you what, when I want something, one, I can either force it to my own demise, right? There's nothing manifesting about that. Or two, the complete opposite happens. And so what I will say, I preface, becoming a special agent. I was intel. I was in Afghanistan. I just got done interviewing for one of my friend's background investigations so she could become a special agent. I specifically got off the phone and was like, happy I'm not doing that. I don't want to be a special agent. So then I deploy. I go to Afghanistan. We're, doing our Predator Reaper missions and putting Hellfire missiles on humans and bombs on buildings. And I was doing my intel briefings, and I happened to be giving a briefing to a general who was the general of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And he had asked what I was going to do with my career. And at the time, I had my separation in. I'd been in for 5 years. I was getting back from Afghanistan, and I was going to get out, and I was going to go to school and study Chinese. And I had already started. Right. Yeah. You'd think I'd live 50 lives if you knew all of the things. So that's actually why I went to Monterey, was to go to the Defense Language Institute and learn Mandarin. So I'm fluent. Really? Have a whole different life doing export enforcement with that. Okay. But anyway, so I was like, I'm going to get out and I'm going to do this and I'm going to work for the State Department. And he was like, no, you're not. You're going to work for me. And I was like, I don't want to be a cop. And then I became a cop. So it was a total accident. I had to be careful saying that in the beginning, because all of my colleagues had tried and applied and finally got in. That was their dream. And I just kind of stumbled into it and got recruited. So total accident.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I would have never guessed. And I was talking to Ryan before you came here. You're just like, you would never guess she's an agent.
No, never.
Like it just,
my short stature and round face.
It didn't occur to me at all. The wealth and wellness, back to that. You built a business around investing, teaching others how to invest and how to be careful with how to invest. But how do you invest in yourself?
Yeah. Well, I think investments in myself, I have really enjoyed meditation. It's something I started in 2021. I got trained in transcendental meditation, actually through the post-traumatic growth training that I received. And
that was military training?
It was. Okay. Yeah. Not associated with the military. It's a nonprofit.
Okay.
And so I learned TM. Before that, I was like, I talk a little fast, right? I'm kind of a ping pong. My energy matches my dogs, my wild boxer. And so for me, prior to that, I was like, I can't meditate. Like, you don't even know the kind of chatter that goes up here and up here, and not possible. And so for me, meditation is a huge investment in myself, just that time. And there's plenty of research to show that any form of meditation is better than no meditation. Mm-hmm. But that one specifically has been very helpful for me. And I've done a couple types since learning that, and it's still my default. And then just moving my body. I take a lot of walks. I started doing weighted walks because I realized I used to lift a lot of weights, and that was my thing. And I grew up powerlifting. I did the CrossFit thing. I competed at regionals in Asia. And so I really do enjoy weightlifting, but I found myself in the gym less and less, but I'm walking all the time. So I'm like, let me put a weighted vest on. And then when this ding dong wants to sniff everything, I don't have to rush her, and I'll just do some squats while she gets her sniff on. So yeah, those are kind of my investments of myself.
So that's so interesting that you mentioned that, because Katie and I were talking about weighted vests last night because she wanted to buy one, and she's like, what sort of weight should I throw on? And I had no idea. My cousin, I see at the gym all the time, and she's always got a weighted vest on. How much weight would you suggest somebody put a weighted, how much weight in that weighted vest should somebody put on for a beginner?
They say work up to 10% of your body weight.
Okay.
I don't know that I followed that rule. I just kind of took some weights out till it felt right.
Yeah. Okay. 5, 10, 15 pounds,
Yeah,
somewhere in that zone or more?
That's a great question. I really don't know because they're all like 1.5 and I'm like, how many are filled? But yeah, I think depending on what your, background is, like for me, I lift weights a lot. And so I do have like a good strength foundation. It's my cardio that sucks. And so, I think it's just based on your comfort. I'd always be, more inclined to try what works instead of go buy some formula. But
cool. Okay. Yeah. Noted. I'll be sure to tell her that.
Yeah. Work later. Up to 10% is what they say.
Okay, cool. You have a regimen, it sounds like, in the wellness, but in terms of wealth, how do you define wealth, Mel, in your life today?
Yeah. So I feel like that's something I've constantly had to revisit and redefine. But I will say, like, I think time wealth is really important. And I think, so like agency and relationships, right? So at the core, I think relationships are wealth. I also think health is wealth because it's really hard to have good relationships when you're ill. And, so there's some Harvard study. It's the longest study on human happiness. And at the end of the study that they've had people, from young ages all the way to death. And over time, I think it's like 75 years. There's a 17-minute TED Talk on it. But it says deep and meaningful relationships are like the most important indicator for both health and happiness. And so I do think relationships are the most important, and I'm always working on it because I don't think it's like something you arrive to. I think it's something that you constantly have to work on. Yeah. So relationships are like, I think, the most important, and I don't know that I'm the best at it, but I try.
Cool. So if you can go back and talk to your younger self at the start of this wealth journey, what would you tell her?
That you can do hard things. And I think I know that, but maybe like knowing that, no, dude, you're going to go through some hard things.
Really emphasizing
Yeah. You will run into hard things and you'll get through it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so what about advice to give to other women out there who are ready but are feeling scared to start investing either in their portfolios or themselves?
Yeah, I think you don't need permission. It's probably so many people are like waiting to be told what to do and when to do it. And like, you don't need permission. You can take messy action. There are costs with that messy action. And of course, a lot of the fear is what will stop people. But like, you don't need permission. You can take action. Just know what you're doing.
Cool. The capital verified business that you've started, I know you've got a lot of other irons in the fire. Seems like this is kind of like your bread and butter.
Yeah.
How do the next 5 to 10 years look like?
Ooh, great question. I'd like to make it a lot more passive as far as digital services and products. Because I do charge a premium for my time. But I do want to help people. And so I have created, free training out there for people to consume on their own time. And then there's also things that I can set up that I'm developing where people can walk themselves through a lot of the stuff that I walk them through so that they don't have to pay the premium for the one-on-one time, but they can still get the benefits of doing that work. To a degree, I think a lot of things do require accountability, and that's why people pay for the one-on-one time. But at the same time, it's a process. And if you can start that process on your own, it can be a lot cheaper and a lot more accessible because I don't, necessarily owe people cheap, but at the same time, I want it to be accessible.
Are you still doing that coffee shop in Big Bear?
Yeah. So I've got a dirt lot that I'm still developing. It is still dirt. And
are you going through like entitlement or like planning and building?
What's
going on with that?
Yeah. So we're past programming, we're in planning. And of course, when we were in that process, we found out that my initial land geo survey was insufficient. So they didn't do like 5 feet around the property. They just did the property itself. So we have expanded it to 10 feet to fully scope it and make sure that the second one is sufficient. Yeah. And so that's where we are in that process. But it's going to be an aircraft hangar, the hangout hangar.
I love it.
Yeah. And so it's going to be party in the front, business in the back. The front is an event space.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so I plan on sourcing from a aircraft boneyard a wing to be like a center table, like a big community table. And that'll be a rental space for events. Front is event space. Back, I would like to have be like accessible via like roll up doors for laundry and storage for just restocking cabins. I feel like property management, quality property management is severely lacking in Big Bear.
Yeah.
Just a, mountain town.
Yeah.
And
have they outlawed the Airbnb kind of short-term rental situation, or is it just
no?
Okay, it's still.
Yeah. So it's the community is very dependent on it. It's a, blessing and a curse, of course, because Airbnb has monumentally shifted the, what that community looks like. It has always been empty cabins. People from the South Bay that had their empty cabins, and there might be 3 people living on a street. And so the locals were used to the whole place being empty. But they were always second homes for the most part. And now they are not only still second homes, but I feel like more have gotten bought up to be an Airbnb, as well as now there's people there. Right. So the labor, I don't feel like there's any less labor, but the population present has shifted, right? People would just come up for a couple weekends in the summer, maybe a couple weekends in the winter, get their ski on, snowboarding, but now it's pretty packed about 3 seasons of the year.
Do you have an outlook on when you'll open that cafe?
I would like to say it'll be built within 2 years.
Cool.
And then, I'm trying to stay flexible with it because I cannot control the county. So we're almost, once I get that second geo survey, I will be able to get planning or permitting in rather. And then once we got permits, I'm doing a prefab structure. So there's some foundation work that needs to be done, but that baby will go up quick.
I want to know more about this hangar and how it's going to be built out. Like, so you're going to a boneyard and you're getting like some junk plane and rolling it out on some dirt? Like how?
No, not necessarily. So I'm just going to grab a wing.
Oh, okay.
It's just going to be like an architectural feature within.
I see.
Yeah. The hangar itself is prefab.
A trailer with an airplane, and that you're going to drop it on the lot, and then you're going to build to it.
Did I explore that option? Yeah, I did.
Because I've seen people do stuff like that. I can't remember. I saw something on social media, and it was like a restaurant inside of an airplane.
Yes, I've seen those.
And I can't remember where exactly it was, but you walked
Florida.
in Florida,
or at least one of them.
Okay,
yeah,
and like people would you'd sit down like where you would normally sit down when you take off. And like people would serve you a meal. Yeah,
I explored it being a museum where I could do something like that. And then we just realized there's too many like land use
issues,
provisions that I would need. And I'm like, no, let's just use it for what it's supposed to be. So I don't need any extra permission because it's ridiculous. So the event space, but coffee will be served because I've got the aircraft theme, right? So we might as well have a flight attendant with a coffee cart. So that's fun. It's shifted quite a bit, but
that's awesome. And so it'll be mostly a summer deal because
we've got the hangar. I mean, it can be all season round. Yeah, all season.
Great. And so the empty properties that you were speaking of, like you I would imagine they fill in during the heat of the summer and maybe the heat of the ski season, right?
Yeah, so they used to be empty, and I'd say they're full 3 out of 4 seasons now.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and so the town demographics have massively shifted, and I think that's where they haven't outlawed Airbnb, and I don't see them ever doing it. But it's not to say it's fully welcome, right?
Something comes up for me is insurance in that market because it's Southern California and wildfires are definitely a thing. Are you kind of encountering some challenges with insurance?
Big time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about like some of the challenges?
I mean, it goes up every year.
Yeah.
Right. And I got dropped from my first insurance, and now I've got, what is it? It's like the state insurance.
Oh yeah.
I'm forgetting what it is at the moment.
Oh gosh. Yeah. It's Cal. Oh my gosh.
I want to say Cal Fire, which obviously isn't it. That's the actual firefighters.
But I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I have. And I think when I first got insurance in 2021, when I bought the place, it's like $800. I mean, it's a 1-bed, 1-bath cabin, right? I also now have a triplex that are all 1 bed, 1 bath.
Big Bear.
Well,
Okay.
And but insurance went from, I think, $800 when I first bought it, and now it's at $1,200.
Oh wow.
Like that's monumental if
Yeah.
you're talking about like just the amount of interest insurance costs that's gone up. And Airbnb is like kind of been a different dynamic too. So the cabin makes a little less.
And you're doing short term for the one?
For the one, yep, and
Okay.
long-term rentals for the other.
Got it. Do you see yourself growing in the Big Bear? Are you taking a pause?
No, I really want to focus on that development.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not really in the acquiring phase. I realized at some point I'm like, I have more than enough. I'd rather stabilize assets than grow them. And like, I barely even get there. Right. And I'm kind of like, I feel like you take the lifestyle approach to your acquisitions, right? I want to go to places that I can also use. I used to own a house in Hawaii, and everybody was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And I was like, yeah, well, it's not mine. It's my long-term renters. Right. And so that was kind of my shift where.
Did you sell that?
I did.
You did?
Yeah. And so I felt like the short-term rental was something cool that you could also use and also get to appreciate personally. And so I'm not, looking to necessarily acquire a bunch of long-term rentals or doors, but I did acquire that because I was looking to provide employee housing with the coffee shop. And then of course the coffee shop has shifted so much that it's not really a thing. And I also you hear a lot of people say that, to kick out renters and increase it and make improvements and increase rent. But I've got these renters that have been in the place for 9 years. And they're both older and they're both hard workers. And so I'm like, I'm not kicking anybody out just because I can force some equity into a property and force rents to go up. So for me, I just don't love that game. So
Me neither. I'm the same way. I'm that type of landlord where, I'd rather take less rent.
I take a loss every month on that triplex, but I've got a ton of equity.
And just so that people don't have to move. Affordable housing is a huge issue. And not having to price gouge everybody.
Yeah.
The economy, everybody knows things are hard right now. So to push on those really sensitive spots, it's just, it doesn't resonate with me. So
Same.
I'd rather help people out than, try and make an extra $100 or $200.
Totally.
Month,
And because I'm doing that development, I left one of the units open in the triplex so that I could stay up there.
Yeah.
Because I need to have the cabin available for guests primarily. Of course,
Right.
I love it and I'll use it if it's open. But the triplex would cash flow had I rented out that third one, and I did for a little bit. But I've got my 2 steady tenants, and it all just depends on your goals and what your values are. And so I've tried to stay true to that as I continue to invest.
Do you have partners, or are you by yourself?
Just me.
Just you?
Yeah.
And what about your husband? Does he invest with you, or is he kind of like, you do your thing, Mel?
I've taken this California man from thinking that he would never own a property in California to we've got our primary, we've got this
Some
triplex. We've got some things. And so he's open to it. He's just not super involved. And by super involved, I mean, he doesn't even know the addresses, right? So I love that for him.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really good conversation, Mel. Is there anything else that you'd like to add for the audience?
Just thanks for having me.
Yeah.
And, I think what you're providing as far as impactful conversations around this, right? The impact, the sustainability. I think everybody thinks about sustainability like being green, right? But it's so much deeper than that. I think if
really
you're
is.
talking about something that is going to fuel your spirit, that's going to fuel your family, that's going to build these deeper connections with yourself and your community. I think that sustainability piece really needs to be core in how you're investing in the decisions you're making. And so thank you for creating this space to have conversations like this.
Absolutely. I feel like it needs to become cultural practice.
Totally.
And I practice every day. So part of our kind of wrapping up of the show, we do like a rapid fire round.
Yeah.
I got some bonus questions to ask you. Great for energy. I think you already answered this one, but cash flow or equity?
In California, equity.
Okay. That makes sense.
But I think in general, it depends on, I think cash flow is really important if you're investing for that specific purpose.
Cool. Biggest red flag in an investment pitch?
Evasiveness. When people don't answer your questions. And maybe that's the cop in me that really pisses me off.
That makes total sense. All right. One book every investor should read.
Ooh. I like Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel.
I haven't read that one.
Also Die with Zero.
Cool. We recently read Never Split the Difference.
Okay.
With Christopher Voss. I felt like that was a really good book. Are you familiar with Christopher Voss?
No, I've heard of the book, haven't read it.
He's you've heard of Christopher though, right?
Yeah.
FBI investigator and also hostage negotiator. And he goes into detail on negotiation tactics and how to talk to people in really, really hard situations. Really good read for me. Best investment you've ever made doesn't have to be financial.
I think the military. I got 3 associates, a bachelor's, a master's, and a ton of work experience and really good friends out of it. Like I just, it's got its negatives, of course, and our DoD budget is absurd, but I will say personally, I've used the military for a lot of growth and I find it to be an incredible way to serve and grow.
That's such an interesting contrast
Totally.
to who you are.
Totally.
To have this military side and the cop.
Yeah, I know.
Really,
even to me, I'm like, what? I'm
really
not a cop.
interesting. Yeah. Okay, last one. The song that's always on your power playlist.
Ooh, anything Modest Mouse. I'm such a millennial
Oh,
with
really?
that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And the weird ones, like Karma Payment Plan, which nobody's heard of, but it's really fucking weird. So yeah.
Great. Well, let's end it on that note. Thanks everybody for checking out another episode of the Wealth and Wellness Report podcast with Mel Palmer. We'll see you on the next one.